there's so much investment in healthcare right now.
What is charge capture?
They now have to understand. They have to be involved and they have to be engaged.
Hello and welcome to the RevTech Rx Podcast powered by Avlead. I'm David Kozlowski. Today we're talking about missing or delayed charges in the billing process. I've got alongside me Javad Sheikh, CEO of Avlead, Laura Fox, who is the Director of Revenue Cycle Services, and Greg Forshee, the VP of Client Success. All right, well, again, here we are, yet another day, another podcast talking about something incredible in the healthcare world. All right, so first and foremost, what are we talking about when we talk about delayed or missing charges? What does this even mean?
From my perspective, when I talk about delayed or missing charges, typically when you have hospitals have bill hold days. So that's essentially in layman term, the amount of days before they're going to send a bill out to a patient after that patient is discharged from the hospital. Typically that's in the 5-day, give or take a couple day window, determined by a hospital. Some hospitals might say it's 3 days, some might say it's 7 days, but that's their bill hold days. That's when we expect to get a bill out the door. To me, any charge that comes in after that initial bill is a delayed charge. Anything that's billed after that from a missing charge perspective is also an issue.
Now, I think that's one of the key points of delayed and or missing charges is that's the true measuring stick of the quality of your charge capture, right? Because we've talked a lot about charge capture. What are the challenges with it? Why is it so important? But the true impact comes to getting revenue and dollars at the end of the day. And missing charges in itself is huge because you're not getting that money, you're not getting that revenue. Delay charges seems like it's less of a big deal, but it truly is a big deal in itself, or even bigger deal, because the amount of effort that goes into reconciling, collecting, identifying, and going back and rebilling for those delay charges has a huge impact in itself as well too.
So how do you fix this?
Have better charge capture practices, right?
Charge capture and charge reconciliation.
Right.
It's the charge reconciliation and understanding what the reconciliation does for you to identify those missing charges in your reconciliation process so that you can capture those prior to your bill hold days being met. That's a big goal of every hospital, but being able to achieve it sometimes is a little bit more difficult.
Do you have like an average of how many hospitals before you implement a product that maybe fixes this, right? Or help them with their workflow process? What's the average look like for hospitals that they're losing because of delayed or missing charges?
I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to say that for a late charge report, I think we can cut down a late charge report anywhere from 40 to 60%. By identifying those charges that are missing during the charge capture process and charge reconciliation. Even before the patient's discharged, we can reconcile those and find those and get them captured, even before the day hold starts, So I think 40 to 60%.
Yeah, I would agree. And just being able to have an automated approach and do that up front, it saves you from, you might have had a missed charge that you had, but being able to automate it and capture that before that 5-day window or that 3-day window is really the key element of that, right? If you have an automated approach, you can find it sooner in the process and you fix it before that bill ever goes out the door the first time is, I think, kind of a key piece of that as well.
Yeah. One of the things that I think it's a big lessons learned for us is as we've kind of gone through a lot of our reconciliation tools is a new process, and we're capturing a lot of key data, but that's going to be as one of them, kind of going back now that we have this at almost 100 plus hospitals to be able to say, hey, this is what your late charges or report look like. This is what your missing charges looked like before. What does it look like now? So that'd be an interesting report to kind of come back with in the future as well too. It'd be good to share.
Do you feel like a lot of CFOs are thinking about delayed missing charges before we have discussions with them?
Yeah, definitely.
I would think so. And a lot of hospitals already have, I wouldn't call it a revenue integrity team meeting per se, but they have departmental meetings that go over the late charges that they're currently seeing and what can they do to improve that late charge process, which, an automation tool can help with that right up front and take the manpower out of it. Let the tool do the work instead of the manpower.
Yeah, I think a lot of CFOs are aware of the problem. I think the way to solve it or attack it is there's two different ways to do it. There's a lot of reactive, right? Hey, let's go and audit all of our systems and let's look at the past 6 months of transactions or the past 12 months. So there's a lot of consulting firms that'll go out there and do that. But the future definitely is going to be looking at these items daily before the bill drops. As you're saying, it's a pre-bill activity, right? You're looking at charge capture activity, fix it before it is a problem, and this is what we want to target.
Yeah, and I think a big piece of that too is the CFO say, I have millions of dollars of late charges. Like I have all these issues with late charges or delayed charges and all these different things. And then you say, what's driving that? And they say, well, hell, I don't know. If I knew, I would have fixed it and we wouldn't have this issue, right? And so to me, that's a big piece of it is they don't understand how they're in the spot they're in. They just know that it's an issue because they get a report that's sent to them that says, hey, you have X millions of dollars of late charges each month. Okay, now what, right, is the issue that they're not able to solve.
Let's talk about that. How is it happening?
Well, a lot of it is bad charge capture practices. You have new staff. You don't have a good way to reconcile and find those misses. So usually it's a week later that you had some person kind of auditing a bill and they say, hey, you missed 3 things. Okay, let's add them to that patient, right? So it's to me, those are kind of the 3 key things that come to mind when the why or how they ended up in that scenario.
I agree with that, and not understanding that it's all the way from registration to the review by medical records. That's the whole charge capture process. The patient has to be registered correctly. I have to pick the right patient to do my documentation and my charges on, and then HIM has to review the documentation to ensure that everything is in place before that bill can be dropped. So it's understanding that full scope again of what is it from A to Z that has to be done.
Right, and how it's identified. So I know previously we talked about manual reconciliation, and if someone manually identifies an issue, sends off an email, someone will go look at it 2 days later, and then they'll find it, and then it might get fixed, and then like a week later, we're triggering a late charge, right? So if those things are automated, it can happen, in real time.
We were talking about financial issues related to the delayed and missing charges, right? Are there any other negatives that come with just missing charges or delays, rather?
Yeah, and we were having this discussion. I think a big part of it is that just the amount of touches it takes to correct that. So now you have a late charge. Someone has to send that bill out again. You have to have an adjusted claim. You have all these additional steps that it's already bad enough that you have a late charge that you're going to add to it because it's not going to get paid as much as the original charges. But the second piece is you have to have 3 additional people touching this thing. That's time, it's money, it's staff, it's all these different things that you're kind of getting a double whammy when you get into that scenario.
And the worst thing is if they retract their payment. They retract their payment because I sent in a late charge, then they're going to pay us again down the line. But it may be 3 months, maybe 6 months, where they paid us in 15 days the first go round. Now they've retracted that payment. Now I have to wait for that payment again. That may or may not even be different than what the original payment was that I received.
Well, and that's a good point too. And we didn't even talk about timely filing, right? So people who have been involved in revenue cycle for a long time understand that all these different payers, Blue Cross, Humana, you name it, they have timely filing limits. What that essentially says is you have to send us the bill within X amount of days, 30, 60, 90, whatever it is. If you don't send us that bill within that amount of days, we're not going to pay it. No ifs, ands, or buts about it because we call that it reached this timely filing limit. That you can no longer bill this to us. So that's a whole nother element. If you find these late charges and you submit that bill again and it's after that timely filing limit, you're not going to get paid for it. So not only are you going to touch it with 3 additional people, you're essentially wasting your time because they're not going to send you a cent more because it's past its timely filing limit.
And their denial rate's basically up, right? Because even the chance of getting it approved is always an issue as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
How does this affect a hospital's bottom line? So we talk about it from the patient perspective. We're kind of tiptoeing around the hospital. How does this affect their bottom line?
Well, it makes it fluctuate. They're not able to keep it balanced. They're not able to keep it in line with where they want to be because if they do have a big late charge problem, they're having to account for that money somehow every month. They know it's missing. They have to adjust their lines, and then they have to readjust them again the next month to make up for what they may or may not have brought in. So it can be an accounting nightmare, patient accounting nightmare. So.
Yeah. Yep, and I think there's 2 parts to it. Like if for missing charges, right, it's just missing revenue, right? In fact, it's a direct issue on the bottom line. The late charges is a big cash flow problem, right? So you've provided all these services, you've done all this work, you've paid the cost of it, but you're not getting or recognizing any of the revenue on it for months later, which impacts cash. Because I know a lot of hospitals I need cash coming in the door.
Cash in the door.
Yep.
Yep.
Interesting. So let's say is there a way to fix this completely where there are no delayed or late charges? Delayed or missing, or or just in general gone.
And/or.
Yeah,
And/or. That's right. And basically, it goes back to that charge capture process. Do we have that outline for what it should be? Do we understand there's an order and there's a charge point, and you have to get from A to Z? Once Z happens, then I have to do the reconciliation, and I have to do it timely to ensure that everything that I expected to be there is there, or everything that the system is telling me should be there is there.
And once it's fixed, like you mentioned a percentage, and I want to just go back to that. Is that, you said 60%? Is that 60% of missing charges found, or is that 60% of missing revenue?
That was late charges. I'm saying that we can reduce late charges from anywhere to 40 to 60% based on a good charge capture and a good reconciliation process.
What is that, if you had to guess?
So just like, I guess tying that to your question, if, we're not going to eliminate it 100%, right? We're never going to eliminate these. There's always going to be system issues. But I think what Laura's saying, hey, you can probably get it down to 60, 60%, or even higher and reduce that. So it's not a 100% loss.
Yeah. So we don't have $1 million of late charges each month. Instead, we have $400,000 of late charges, which is still seems like a high number, but it's all relative, right?
Yeah. Well, that's good. So when we're talking about the issue or issues related to missed and delayed, are there any repercussions negatively that can come from this outside of patient experience or?
So there's patient experience, but there's also a regulatory compliance issue as well too, right? So you don't want to make sure you've got reduce the late charges, which will reduces your errors, and then that you won't have less compliance or audit issues, right? Because if you've undercharged somebody or overcharged somebody, that you can get ahead of it, right? So it doesn't become an issue later.
So how many hospital, or we don't have to get into numbers, but let's say I'm a hospital who has a bunch of late charges just sitting, okay? But we're going to eventually shoot them out. What happens to the hospital?
One, we've already talked about cash flow, right? Cash flow is an issue. Two is the longer you wait, and I think Laura mentioned this earlier as well too, that you might run into the timely filing issues that if you wait too long, you won't be able to do them. And then three, the staler or the older these charges get, the more scrutiny they'll get, right? Sure. So, hey, is this an accurate charge? Do you have the documentation to back it up? And then it leads to more errors, right?
So it could really become a big problem havoc for a hospital if they're not doing this correctly in general.
Correct.
Yeah. And if just think about it kind of in layman's terms. Am I going to audit the one that a hospital that I don't ever get late charges from? It seems like they're very, very accurate in their charging. Or am I going to audit the one that they've got millions and millions of dollars of late charges every single month? And we're thinking, do they even know what they're doing, right? Why are they always adding things after the fact? Why are they not like this other hospital who's very, very accurate, very timely in their charge practices? To me, if I'm an auditor or someone in that space, I'm going after the one that looks on paper like they don't know what the hell they're doing.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to push pause here because I think there's a lot more information to be had. And this is the tip of the iceberg. I know we're going to discuss more of how to fix these issues in later podcasts. So please, if you're listening, tune in again soon as we go over how to fix this problem. Again, you're listening to the RevTech Rx Podcast powered by Avelead. I'm David Kozlowski, and hope to see you soon.